I'm joined today by Erica Komisar. Thank you so much for coming in, Erica.
Thank you for having me.
If you could just start by giving us an introduction about yourself and about your work, please.
So I'm a social worker, a psychoanalyst in private practice in New York, and also an author of books about parenting. And so I've written two books. One is about 0 to 3 and the importance of attachment security as the foundation for the long-term mental health of children. And the other is about the second critical period of brain development, adolescence, which is 9 to 25, and about how that's another critical period where the brain is shifting and you have another opportunity as a parent to help your children to learn to regulate their emotions.
Excellent. So I heard about you from one of the Lila Rose podcast interviews, and I found it to be shockingly common sense and rather, I would say, devastating for the Western mothering culture. Could you please tell us a little bit about your recommendations based on the research for mothering a 0 to 3-year-old, especially how it conflicts with the current practices in Western culture?
Well, there was a shift in culture in our country about 75 years ago with the feminist movement, which was to shift from a focus on children and the family to a focus on women and women's rights. And so that needed to happen. I mean, I think, sometimes movements become extreme in nature to make some headway. And so they pushed through and gave quite the wrong message, I think, because they were too extreme, which was instead of saying to women, we're fighting for women to have choice to be at home and be mothers, which is important work, or to go out into the workforce and not have children, or to balance the two, but still mothering is very important. So, the message should have been, we don't want to put down mothering because mothering is very important. That wasn't the message. Gloria Steinem never had children. She came out and said, you are a traitor to this movement unless you go out to work. Your children will be just fine. And daycare then became the byproduct of that movement, which was women matter, not children. It became a binary thing. Instead of saying, of course, women matter, mother's happiness is key to children's happiness. And so if mothers are very unhappy mothering, then of course we need to allow them to have choice to work out in the outside world. But the idea that the messaging was really that mothering was not important work and not valuable work. And so what happened is 75 years later, we teach young women that they should get a great education, have a fabulous career, and that having children should be an afterthought. And your children will fit into your life like an accessory on your outfit. And it's just not true. And it is probably one of the main contributors to this mental health crisis with children. We have 3 generations of children who have been benignly and sometimes not so benignly neglected by their mothers and by their fathers. The 2-parent working family sounds like a good thing economically, and it's great for the GDP, and it's great for couples who want more material stuff and to have more materially, but it doesn't do anything for children. In fact, it does the opposite of anything good. So let me talk about the first 3 years. The first 3 years is a critical period of brain development. Children are born neurologically and emotionally fragile. They're also born physically fragile. All you have to do is look at a newborn to see how incredibly underdeveloped they are. There's theories to say that babies should not be born for another 9 months, that if they could stay in utero, it would be better for them. But we have grown as a species. We have huge heads, huge brains. And the truth is that the host, the mother, could never carry that child another 9 months. I would think of us more like marsupials. Think of us like kangaroos. Kangaroos have babies well too early, but they keep them in a pouch until they're fully developed because they can't carry them inside their bodies. They keep them in the pouch. They continue to be nurtured, and then they're finally developed to be more independent. So in many parts of the world, babies are born and then carried on their mother's bodies for the first year, and then another 2 years of keeping very physically close to the mother. Because that's the way we've evolutionarily done it, because we can't carry them another 9 months. We've literally had skin to skin contact with them, first on the front, then on the back, if the mother has to work in the fields or go to a store to work or whatever she does, weaving or a tailor or whatever she's doing professionally. And women in those parts of the world work. They dig their potatoes. They go to women's baking cooperatives. They work, but they don't leave their children behind. And they carry their children for the first year. So we do quite the opposite. We separate mothers and babies as early as possible with the value system that mothers need to be free of the burden of raising children. And mothers' rights matter. And if you look at any newspaper or magazine, it's always about women and men's rights as parents, not about children's rights. We stopped talking about what's good for children. Penelope Leach, many years before me, said in her books, if you don't want to care for your own children, don't have them. And that's the messaging that, you can have a fabulous career as a woman, and that's wonderful. Get an education, have a remarkable career. But then if you decide you want to have children, ratchet down your career, take time off. Treat that first critical period of brain development, 0 to 3, with a tremendous amount of respect, because if you don't, you will have hell to pay later. And I'm seeing the result in my practice of the hell to pay that parents have, which is those children end up less emotionally regulated. They end up with stress disorders like anxiety, depression, attentional or distractibility issues, what people are labeling like crazy as ADHD. That's not a condition. It's a stress response. It's a symptom of children's brains in a hypervigilant state of stress. So we've gotten it all wrong. It's not that women can't have careers. It's that if you choose to have children, and you don't have to have children, but if you choose to have them, there are irreducible needs that children must be met if those children are going to be mentally healthy and emotionally healthy later on. And we don't tell young women this.
Thank you. That was amazing. That was the best summary of the Christ of the Motherhood I've heard to date. Thank you. So what you said about some theories of children, possibly it would be helpful if they were in the womb longer. It reminds me of this comment that Jordan Peterson has on regarding Genesis, that there's a war between the pelvis of the woman and the cranial size of the baby.
Yeah.
So there is a natural limitation to how long the baby can be in the womb.
That was the first theory. The first theory was the size of the baby's head, and then it evolved to the next theory. The more recent theory was that energetically, mothers couldn't sustain a baby, because what happens is our babies grow so large in the last trimester, so that we couldn't energetically sustain them. And so they're born, but they're born as neonates. They're all born premature. I mean, maybe that's the best way to put it. That there was a researcher I interviewed for my book who said that, and she does neuroscience research on mother-infant attachment, and she said that mothers are the central nervous system to the baby in the first year. Babies do not have their own central nervous system. Mothers actually serve that purpose. So they're basically born premature. And so what we're doing is we're taking preemie babies. I mean, this is a radical statement. We're putting them in institutional care with strangers. These babies go into intense states of shock and stress. I mean, the salivary cortisol levels of babies who are separated from their mothers. So think of their mothers as their only source of safety and security in the world. I mean, we treat these neonates, these young babies, we project onto them self-sufficiency and independence. It's kind of crazy. It's a little bit, if you ask me, it's really crazy to project onto them that they can manage, because they can't manage.
But everyone else is doing it. Doesn't that make it perfectly fine?
I know you're being sarcastic. And the answer is, if everybody else was jumping off of a cliff, would you follow them?
Maybe it's a really cool cliff. I don't know. Maybe it's a cliff that gives me a lot of material success
Well,
at the end of it.
it's a cliff with a lot of mental health issues in your children later on. So maybe you need to think about that when you're making decisions, either decisions about having children at all, or decisions about how you're going to raise those children and what you're willing to sacrifice and give up in those early years when your children need you. Maybe you give up the bigger apartment. Maybe you give up the second car. Maybe you give up the vacations. Maybe you give up some material desires, and you cut down your lifestyle in those years. You pare it down so you can give your child what they need, because that casts the longest shadow on the health of your child, a forever shadow. You can wait for the vacations. You can wait for the car. You can wait for the big house.
It's so relevant that you're speaking about this now with the research coming out of the child mental health crisis. We have Jonathan Haidt publishing The Anxious Generation. There's Bad Therapy came out. In fact, I don't mean to sound alarmist, but when I hear you talk about the consequences of this on the child, it makes me wonder if it's abusive to the child, if it should be like outlawed to remove a child
I
from a
mean,
mother.
again, what I would say is my goal is to educate, not punish parents, because the truth of the matter is that parents are not educated about this. When I have thousands of emails every year come to me from people all over the world because of the books I write, and saying, I never knew this. No one told me this. So it's one of the reasons that I write, because it's a way to reach a lot of people with very important knowledge and research. And so, right, that's one piece of it, is you can't punish people who don't know something. The other thing is that we have done this to these generations. I mean, I'm 60. It was also done to my generation. So, meaning the adults in the room did this to their children. And then we have something called generational expression of attachment disorders, which is that if you did not take great pride and pleasure in the raising of your children, if you did not feel connected to your children and want to be with them above everything else and be interested in them above everything else, that love of child rearing is not passed down to the next generation. And the mixed messaging we have given young women and young men is that child rearing is unimportant, and to be handed off to low-paying, untrained employees who you don't respect. First of all, I have the greatest respect for nannies. I ran a nanny agency with 2 other therapists for about 4 years, because I had this idea that we were going to educate nannies to be sensitive, empathic nurturers when mothers were not able to do that or not available, like to be really good surrogates, because we knew this was going to happen anyway. And what we found is that some of the nannies were incredibly nurturing, but what we found is the mothers were incredibly ambivalent about having nurturing nannies. So my point is that this is not about punishing parents. It's about understanding how the heck did we get in the position we're in now, which is that mothers don't want a mother. They'd much rather be at an office job. Babies are put in institutional care and handed off to strangers at the youngest of age, when they still should be worn on their mother's bodies. And our children are going into these hypervigilant states of stress, which has, as I said, casts a very long shadow into their childhood and into their adulthood, right? So what we know is that it's leading to generations of young people with attachment disorders who can't even see, they can't empathically see the vulnerability of their children. They can't see it. So when you stop being able to see the fragility and vulnerability of your own children and the needs of your own children, you don't feel that maternal preoccupation. that's very disturbing. And that is not, again, that's on the adults in the room. What did we do? And how can we undo it? Because I'm an optimist. One thing is, America is the worst country in the world in terms of respecting children and mothers. Why do you think I'm saying that?
Why is that true, or why are you saying that?
Why am
Why
I
is it
saying?
true?
Do we have a paid leave in this country like Slovenia, like Hungary, like Finland? Do we have, even if you go to Sweden and Europe, I mean, they have problems and I go to Europe a lot and speak and push back so they don't remove their policies. But, every other country in the world has paid leave for mothers or primary attachment figures. We are the only country in the world, other than Papua New Guinea, that doesn't respect children and mothers. So we talk a big game about family, family is everything. The Republicans talk about family, the Democrats talk about family. And even when the Democrats talk about paid leave, they talk about 6 weeks, 3 months. I'm like, an infant at 6 weeks, they're just waking up from childbirth. They're just waking up. That's not when you hand them over to daycare. And so neither party really wants to spend the money. I always say, put your money where your mouth is. Don't talk about family being important unless you're willing to pay. You can make it needs-based, because there's a lot of women who don't need it, who just have to make the right choice to be with their children as much as possible. But for the women who don't have the choice, they need to have the ability to stay with their children and be financially supported, period. What kind of
Yeah,
country are we if we don't respect the needs of children?
I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. To your point, I'm not sure if I've ever met a mother who doesn't put her child first, but she doesn't know, and there's not. I think there's a lack of intentionality in parenting, of taking it as seriously as one would take a professional endeavor to discover what's best for the child, especially when there's this overwhelming force from the popular culture, friends, family, of prioritizing other things, namely career over the family and the greatest profession, which is motherhood.
You
It
know,
reminds me of.
yeah.
Good.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I wonder if you're familiar with the work of Katie Faust, Them Before Us.
I
I've
know
had
Katie.
her
Yeah.
on here.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
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 It's precisely what you're describing, putting the so-called, well, let's say the preferences of parents over the rights of children.
Yeah. And she talks a lot about that. And I mean, she talks more about technology and all that, but I mean, she has it right that I think I probably wrote a part of her foreword or something, or I wrote a blurb for her, for Katie. But the concept is right, that we have prioritized adults' needs over children's needs, and in doing so, our children have suffered. And so the only way to turn this around is if we start to prioritize children's needs over adults' needs.
So about the consequences on the child. As a therapist, I'm also interested to hear about the consequences on the mother. I imagine if you have this infant who's tiny, helpless, you've been caring for 9 months, and in a short amount of time, you're away from the child for a large part of the day. How does that affect the mother?
It depends on whether the mother feels maternal preoccupation. So if the mother has a strong mothering instinct and she's forced to go back to work either because of financial need or because there's a pressure from her husband, from her family, from her employer, right? If there's a tremendous amount of environmental pressure on her, then it causes that mother incredible conflict, stress, often resulting in postpartum depression. So there's a huge uptick in postpartum depression. One reason for that is that sometimes attachment disorders don't appear until after you give birth. So, and they can take the form of postpartum depression because there is a conflict over nurturing that child. And that, again, is that mother's fault? No, it is an undiagnosed form of an attachment disorder. Again, it doesn't appear until the catalyst of giving birth happens, right? So, but also, depression is, the definition of depression is the result of internal conflict. And so we know that mothers get depressed and anxious. They get anxious and depressed when they are separated from their children, right? Too early, before that baby is ready, before that mother is ready. And, and this is why I say we also have to educate fathers, because there are a lot of fathers out there that maybe rightfully so say, my wife promised me that she would work forever, that she would have this baby, what I call drop and run, that she would have this baby and then go back to work in 3 months, and we could maintain our mortgage and our 2 cars and our vacations and our lifestyle and whatever. And now she's telling me she wants to stay home with the baby because she didn't realize how much she would love the baby. And no, you can't stay home with the baby because you promised. There's a lot of young fathers doing this right now. So when I treat these mothers, I try to get the husbands in to talk to them about attachment security, to talk to them about what they're asking of their wife is going to be damaging to their child and to their wife. You're going to cause resentment and anger. You're going to cause conflict in your wife that leads to depression and anxiety, but you also are going to do tremendous harm to that child. And what was the point in having a child to begin with? Wasn't it to raise a healthy, happy, resilient child? So I think fathers also need to be educated, and there needs to be a kind of built-in flexibility when young people have children, that you don't know how you are going to feel until you have that baby. And there needs to be a big cushion of, you may want to stay home with that baby. And even if the mother is saying, oh no, I'm very career driven and I'm never going to want to stay home with the child and I'm going to drop it, I'm going to give it to a nanny or put it in daycare. Many of those mothers, 60% of women in America, would stay home with their children in the early years if they had the opportunity. If they had either the financial opportunity or the environmental support. And they're given neither. And so there's a lot of young mothers who develop postpartum depression, anxiety, and in a way, they have to dissociate. So they have to become schizoid with the babies, which is they have to turn off any of their responses, any of their sadness, any of their fear. They have to turn it off. And that means removing themselves empathically from that baby. The only thing that keeps that baby alive and healthy is that mother's empathy. So when we cut that mother off from her empathic maternal preoccupation, we're actually damaging the connection between the mother and the baby.
That sounds terrible.
And that can be permanent. Yeah.
So to clarify your earlier point about the unhealthy attachments, so you're saying that the mother may have had an unhealthy attachment when she was a child, but it doesn't become manifest as her own child.
Well, think about childbirth as a kind of psychotic experience. You're carrying this living person that's moving around, and then it comes out of you in this way that is almost violent looking to someone who hasn't seen childbirth, right? If you ever seen childbirth, if you have children, you know it's a very dramatic experience. For a mother, but it opens a door to the past. Sort of like Alice in Wonderland, open this door. It opens a door to the past that may have been closed for a very long time, and the defenses may have sealed that door. And so it's not until you have a baby that you remember what it was like to be a baby and to have a mother and what that mothering experience was like. And if that mother was joyful, nurturing, completely preoccupied with you in a very healthy and loving way, then the door that gets opened is one of sensitive, empathic nurturing and maternal preoccupation. But if the door that gets opened is of a narcissistic mother or a resentful mother or an absent mother or an abusive mother or a depressed mother. Houston, we have a problem. And, that's a saying, not Houston actually, but Houston, we have a problem is the expression, but we have a problem. And the problem is that door that gets opened is a waterfall of emotion, of depression, and what we call anaclitic loss, which is loss of mother. So what gets triggered is anaclitic depression. That's what postpartum depression is. The hormones are just the catalyst. Childbirth is just the catalyst. People go around talking about the hormones, the hormones. Hormones are a catalyst. They are not, they're sidebar, but they're not the main show. The main show is what were they a catalyst to?
At that point, you wouldn't solve that problem by pumping the mom full of chemicals, antidepressants, and so forth.
No.
So
You
that
would
was a
get her
very
good,
interesting
you
thing.
would get her good psychodynamic talk therapy. Unless she's had, so mind you, some depression comes with psychosis. There is psychosis related to depression, that if that mother is wanting to kill her baby or kill herself, then yes, she needs to be hospitalized and she needs to be given medication to stabilize her. But most mothers aren't suffering from postpartum depression in that extreme manner. And for those mothers, they need talk therapy with somebody who is able to examine their relationship with their own mother and can really help them mourn what happened to them in their childhood and decide how they want to raise their child and help them to deeply connect in terms of attachment to that baby. Because you could say that postpartum depression is a result of an attachment disorder. Because when it comes to attaching to that baby and being maternally preoccupied, those women really feel conflicted and struggle. And so what does society tell them? Take pills, go back to work, get somebody else to care for your child. I mean, we really are a superficial culture. That's not the messaging we want to give mothers. We want to give mothers compassion. We want to say, this has opened up something for you in the nature of mourning. You are mourning at a time when you need to be joyful, and you can't be joyful about this baby because you are mourning the loss of your own mother in that moment. Because the women who have had joyful mothers and loving mothers, what gets turned on for them is that. And, a lot of those women who we've told work, 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 work outside the home, it's the most important thing, get educated, work, work, work. A lot of those women, when they have the baby, the door that gets opened is to their joyful experiences with their mothers. And they realize it, but it's too late. They've made all these promises to all these people. And so what I would suggest is before you have a baby, go get some therapy and talk about your own mother and your relationship with your mother. And not in a superficial fashion, but in a deeper fashion. Did your mother want you? Could she play with you? Could she be attentive to you? Was she interested in you? Did she want to be somewhere else? Was she a narcissist? Did she not see you or understand you as a child? Those are things you want to explore before you have a baby. And then you mourn and you get through mourning, and then you can be the best mother you can be.
To your point about the superficiality, to me, it seems like just another example of the fact that we live in a dystopia. At least that's my opinion. And I do. It is fascinating to hear your conceptual framework because it's very different from mine. You're coming from the psychodynamic framework, which maybe we come to the same practical conclusion, but I'm coming from the cognitive behavioral framework. So it is nice to see when the different frameworks lead to the same conclusions. Well, I would like to ask you as we get to the end here, what is your motivation for the work that you do, and what is your vision for what you want to see accomplished?
Well, I wrote the books that I wrote to educate parents, hoping that it would influence their decisions, hoping that it would encourage them to go into treatment if they needed to, and make the best choices for their families, because you can't make the best choices unless you have all the information, right? So that's the first thing. The other is that I really wrote the first book, to get paid leave in this country, and it is nearly impossible to get politicians to even speak to me, let alone listen to me, because it involves changing a value system to really value mothers being home with their children in those early years to have a healthy society. You cannot have a healthy society if your citizens are all breaking down. I don't care what the GDP tells you. So the idea is that, and there's a lot of research to show that when you allow mothers time to be with their children, they come back to the workforce more motivated and more grateful and more productive. If you allow them to work part-time instead of full-time, and you don't force them to feel so in conflict over mothering, then they are better employees, happier employees, more productive employees. So, the issue is, what we're really concerned about in this country is the bottom line. And that isn't going to work when it comes to the health of our children, because that can't be the priority. The priority has to be the health of our children, and then the bottom line. But the bottom line can't come first.
Well, thank you so much. This was an excellent conversation, and I really wish you all the best in the good work that you do.
To you too. Thank you for having me.